And we are live. Thank you for joining us for some Vanilla SE. I have a guest street epistemologist today, Harry, who is going to examine the claims of Fanny. And she's talked about 2 or 3 different claims, so it's going to be a bit of a surprise. Harry and Fanny, which of you would like to tell us about yourselves first?
How about you go ahead first, Fanny?
Fanny, your audio is not good.
I think it's muted. I think you might be muted.
Fanny, you are muted. There we go. Now you can go.
Am I okay?
Now I hear you. Thank you.
Hello, people. Well, I'm Fanny. I'm Brazilian physician, live in Canada, immigrant. And I have a small YouTube channel where I interview people I follow and admire. And I have crossed my path with all these amazing people here. Reed, Anthony Magna Bosco, Harry, Dali, my personal juggling lesson, sorry. So I don't know. I think we're gonna start from where we stopped the last video on morals and eating diet, like a specific diet on being vegan or vegetarian, and if that makes people more moral or less moral for doing it. So.
Okay. So Fanny, think about how to make that into a small claim that I can type. And Harry, tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I've been doing street epistemology for about 2 years now. I do most of it online, particularly over COVID-19. But I have been out in the streets before in London and in Toronto doing SE stuff. And yeah, I guess that's all the relevant information. Personally, I'm a soil scientist. And I really love this kind of stuff. I really love these kind of open dialogues. And I think I think the format of street epistemology creates some really interesting conversations. I guess that's all I have to say for now. And we can get into the meat of doing the claim.
Yeah. So Fanny, can you give me your talk about animal in a short claim that I can type?
Oh no, I think it was more like Harry was. I heard Harry saying something about he felt that he's more moral than other people because he doesn't eat animals. And then
I remember this was his claim from last week. Yes.
Yeah, and then there was something about cannibalism, and then he actually asked me something, and I felt like, wow, I never thought about this. And we start developing that idea, and it kind of stopped. I think you cut because of time, and I felt like, oh, maybe we could develop that better because I guess we are all about this. We are trying to protect animals all the time, and we are already facing this in the laws. You know,
I could try and.
Can you try?
I think I can try and codify it into a lovely. Yeah, I can try and codify it into a sentence or two. So it was all about one of the morals that you were saying that you find particularly important is freedom. So freedom of the individual to express themselves. And I went along the line as, how do you think about the freedom of the animal to express themselves, and how does that affect your rights compared to their rights? So your freedom to eat a ham sandwich is imposing on the freedom of a pig to live a certain type of lifestyle or to live altogether. And we were just exploring that dynamic in terms of freedom. So it could be, we could have something along the lines of kind of an idea or a question, something to do with how does freedom of the individual and the importance of that particular moral affect how we should act towards other creatures. Something along those lines. If you're okay with that, Fanny, or you'd like to play with that a bit more and change it into something.
Yeah, I think that was going down the road on the idea of but who has what are the rights and where they start, and who are the individuals or creatures that actually have rights.
Right.
And then you brought something about morals being something very subjective, inherited to humans. So if you were not here, would not have morals to be judged, and nobody to maybe protect it, all the other vulnerable creatures.
So before we get on to kind of my beliefs about kind of the meta ethics of things, I think let's nail down a single claim. So I think I'd love to just figure out for you personally where you land on which animals do you think should have rights and which animals do you think don't have rights, and how do you figure that out yourself?
Yeah, that is a difficult line, because now we were just like going down that there are animals that have rights and others don't. I don't know. Maybe if they feel,
Okay.
it's about
Okay.
feeling. It's this
Okay.
back to what you said about suffering. I think it fits well. So kind of agreeing with you. Yeah.
Okay. So a capacity to suffer means that for you it enters into this kind of moral realm where it should be given certain types of rights.
Yeah.
Okay. And you were saying before that humans should have more rights than other animals.
I don't want to go down like my kind of activism, but it's difficult to get out of our bias and our agenda. It's because every time I talk about this, I kind of feel like I go down the same path, and I feel mad in the end because people that are like animal protection in that way, they would not fight the people that actually oppress animals. I think like Western society, we understand that there is some type of harm on raising animals in large scale, and we have to kill them to eat. But we kind of like very not even humanist, because we are very caring about all animals, all lives, and we try to do. We spend more money. For example, when I mentioned that day, we spend more money buying meat that is free range raised, and so we make that decision that's totally free just to be sure that those animals had a more dignity in their lives. I don't know, like we are doing that. But then when it comes to like animal protection, we see like organs that's supposed to protect animals as like PETA that sometimes are not protested, and they have very controversial policies, or even religious religious rituals that in fact cause harm and suffering to animals, and or not protested by the same groups that will now see that as what they call religious freedom to do those rituals. And this has happened like in Canada, of like those orthodox rituals that's like they burn the heads of the lambs and cut their feet off while they are alive. And I was like, where are those activists and all the vegans and vegetarians to protest this? And they're like, oh, but we don't want to be called whatever phobe for this religion, or to have been to be prejudiced or bigot against the religion ritual. And it's like, oh, but it's all about principles. So I don't know.
So into your mind, the moral claims come in when something has a capacity to suffer, and you think that in the Western society we have a cultural understanding, and people already make purchasing decisions based on animal welfare. And it sounds to me like you think that we do a pretty good job in the Western society at looking after animals within this realm of a capacity to suffer. And you also think that there is hypocrisy from organizations which state that they're there to defend animal rights, but maybe they impose on other types of rights, or in some circumstances they just simply don't do enough at all because there's a clash of different principles happening.
Yeah.
I'm interested about this idea that, so you think right now in the Western society, animals are kind of treated well, or that they are that we meet their basic standards and their basic needs, and kind of the current practices aren't immoral? Or would you say how does that thought play in your head?
Well, I think I'm a very realistic person when it comes to all these issues in general. If we
Okay.
talk about Black Lives Matter or any other type of bigotry, LGBTQ rights, I think that is something that most of people want a revolutionary change. And I think all those things are a process that we are going through together. So it's like,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think racism. Maybe we talk about something because now I used to use races as something that was gone, but now they keep talking about systemic races and races everywhere, and it's like, okay, so I cannot even use because it would not be truth to everybody. But I used to use that as an example of like, look, the rights in LGBTQ, for example, and I used to do this when I used to work with on the roads with all levels of workers, like from doctors. Actually, I was the only doctor in the base, and then there were nurses and technicians and a lot of road construction and truck drivers and heavy workers, and mostly men that in a level of education not really high, so a lot of prejudice in different levels, and mostly uh, homophobic, would say. And I would not even use that word because I think it's so strong. It's just like some people, it's not that they are going to treat any gay person badly. It's just they have their personal beliefs and they're very religious and they are old. So they have their, personal problem with accepting homosexuality in general, in reality. And many times I had to tell them, like, look, and they're like, doctor, you want us to respect, not to respect, you want us to accept this, to be fine with guys kissing in front of us, something. And I was like, look, it's not about accepting or having it close to you, but you understand that seeing it and respecting, you don't need to be like, I'm for it, and you still can respect it. And I try to point to them like, look, I think this is something that naturally is going to go with the generation. So I don't think we need to ban, I don't think we should make laws saying like banning the word faggot, for
Okay.
example, you know, because that's not the right way to fix
Okay.
any type of bigotry.
Okay.
And I used to use the example, racism was accepted in the generation before, but many people saw that and saw like as a bad example, and it's like, I don't want to repeat that. And that many people that were really, really racist died, and now we have less racist. Maybe we're never going to be completely like pure, so I'm against the puritanism. Like maybe we're never going to have a planet completely pure of out completely of races. Maybe there will only have some races all alone in the planet, and we're never going to be able to exterminate racism. But I don't think one example would be also
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm just losing the
No.
path of
I
conversation.
think I'm getting the thread you're going on here, because we're talking about progress in society, and specifically, we're talking about the morals of animals and whether we're doing enough as a Western society for it. And you're saying, I think what you're saying, and please correct me if I get this wrong, that we are doing a good job. There is a better place to be, for sure. But all these things take time and progress, and we've got to be careful in terms of the speed at which we undergo change, because there might be political problems associated with doing that. And we have to have compassion for those who don't quite follow with that particular moral lead at the moment. But that doesn't mean that we're not doing a good job. Because at the end of the day, it's a process. And do you think the process, in terms of, for instance, animal rights, kind of the topic we're on right now, do you think that process is going well in terms of it's at the correct speed? It's not going too fast or too slow, but
Yeah, I think it's in the right path. I think we are talking about all these issues at the same time, and we are caring about all those problems all the time.
okay. How do you
So there
judge?
are,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah.
No, sorry.
No, but I just feel like there are groups fighting for those rights, even if maybe the message is not the perfect one. But I think the most important thing is to be able to talk to the other side, maybe not be so condescending or maybe not
Mm,
be so accepting to people that have actually prejudice, but at least be able to talk to them in the level that you can. If I would yell at those guys, you're just homophobes, and and treat them with hate, they would never listen to what I had to say. And I believe in the end, everybody got that. It's like, there is a personal right and
Mm.
individual rights that we could all respect, be secular in the level of the, not just religiosity, but in all the social rules, like to be more like yeah, those are social rules, they are not
Are there
laws.
Are there some things where, because we obviously do have laws for certain types of certain behavior that we think actually does go over the mark, and actually, instead of being kind and compassionate, we resort to either violence or some form of force. What view is the line there where you see, okay, so we're having progress in these different areas. Racism is bad, animal cruelty is bad. There's a level of progress that needs to occur, and we need to be compassionate about those who are not quite with it at the moment. And it looks like it's heading in the right direction. And maybe you take kind of like a realist, kind of pinker approach of saying that, we've had enormous progress over the past 50, 60 years. Surely in your mind, are there, I guess would be my question, are there some actions in your mind where you're like, hold on, that we need to put compassion to one side and actually stop this individual doing those particular practices?
Well, I don't think we need more laws. I think we need to stick with the principles that we already have. Because
Okay.
when I talk about, like, okay, let's talk about the groups that feel vulnerable and need special laws and protection. I don't agree with that, because I think
Okay.
the law, justice in the idea is to be blind, is to not judge a person for any inherent traits or sexuality or gender or sexual preference. So when people say like, oh, we need Black Lives Matter, for me it's, I don't know what to say, because I think it's like, it almost sounds racist on excluding blacks from humans, because it's like, look, there is a law already that says like you can't kill people. So I don't need to make a specific law to say like don't kill blacks, because blacks are obviously people, so I don't make distinction. The same thing I'm saying, like, oh, we need to put woman rights or human rights. It's like, oh yeah, that is, of course, that is a statement that you should make it. Maybe Middle East might need some of that message, but I don't think Western society that treats women different from men. I've never been treated like, okay, there is some sexual social prejudice. It's still, yeah, because sexual value is different. Genders have different things to offer, and that's why they are judged different. But it's another conversation that it just goes down the line of people being emotional activists or being rational and understand nuances.
It might be interesting if we could codify some of those political kind of classical liberal opinions into something, into like a statement that we can explore with like a confidence scale, and seeing how your confidence within that philosophy changes according to evidence and ideas.
That would be awesome.
So have you got
I would like to see, but I don't know, because I have moved around the political compass quite a lot throughout my life. I've been like into different sides on defending gun rights, on defending abortion rights, and I don't know if I'm set yet.
Fair enough.
So yeah, I think we're pretty fluid. So I think it's interesting. It's a good exercise, but maybe it takes what I was trying to say. Like, maybe it doesn't take like a few or a couple or even many interactions. Maybe it takes like more like years.
Yeah, and the idea of doing street epistemology is not necessarily to change someone's mind, but simply to understand how they come to know things. So to simply understand what you're doing in order, and maybe what's led you to that position. So it could be, for instance, you could make a confident claim such as that classical liberalism is the best approach when it comes to trying to improve society, something like that.
Mhm.
Would there be any claims like that where you'd be comfortable kind of exploring kind of a little bit more narrow band so we can move this into a more traditional SE
Yeah.
format?
So this would be the other claim you talked about. Is it about being sexy?
Yeah, we could do that one if you'd like.
Yeah,
Is that good for you?
We can talk. I think it opens up the door for that conversation as well. Yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
perfect.
I'll leave
Would
you
you
to
want
it.
to go ahead, Fanny?
Well, I don't know. Where do we start? I think I have talked to a lot of people on SC groups that I am part of, and given a little bit of my opinions, isolated opinions on like drugs or guns or abortion, and ends up being very liberal. And I'm not a leftist. I've been more leftist. I'm very centrist now. I'm just jump off from left to right the line, but I'm very down libertarian. So I do think the classic liberalism is a great idea, and I think if we is what I mentioned, to be secular on the social, so social liberal, yeah.
Okay. So is there a way that we can is there like a statement you'd like to make, like classical liberalism is what is the best political position for society, so the one I read before, or is there do you want to do one about kind of gender roles or
I think
sex?
it's difficult to talk about politics in that way, just because when it comes to any other political position, we would end up finding out that we don't have any pure capitalism or socialist, and people keep pointing that out. So I'm not sure which example we could point as being something we could look up to, because politics for me is more like trying to repeat, or it's more it's almost scientific as an experiment. You do try something, and we should use that method of like facing politics more like that way, so we can look at other places and see where they apply those policies and how it came out. Of course, there are multi-layered differences in between when you talk about people and policies, because we talk about the population, and you have to see the demographics, because there are factors into those demographics that can be important to the result we get. But I love to see politics in the United States of America the way that you guys cut into states and gave that much freedom to the states to do their own ideas, and then we can actually analyze those and use to one another to repeat or to not do the same.
So would you say, in terms of kind of this classical liberal approach of you, is about exploring the different political histories that have happened over time in different countries, using almost, I think, what you described as science or a political science, and that would probably be the way that you come to understand or know which political position that you stand on. You like to use kind of rational inquiry and examples, historic examples of where a society has been typically labeled as, X, communist or whatever it may be, or fascist, or classically liberal, or whatever, however you want to codify that spectrum. You've seen you're using examples in society, and then that's what's moved your needle in terms of where you land on the political spectrum. And at the moment, you said you're kind of a centrist, and you espouse like classical liberal ideals, like freedom of the individual, a secular state. I'd be interested to know, if you were, for instance, if there was an example where an increase in state monopoly and would improve the lives of humans, would improve a particular society, would that move you off a slightly classical liberal position?
Yeah, I'm definitely for the smaller governments, and that is one of the points I was going to point out. That is, like, I don't think we have an example where we can find this maybe utopic model that I see in my mind working, and because I only see governments getting more power, and for us to have a classic liberal model that works, we would have to have a smaller government and government working, taking care of less and doing less
Okay.
than what we do now.
If there's no examples of it currently now, what gives you the confidence that that is the best way to set up society?
Well, I think that is actually it can be as a bad thing, but also can be as an advantage for politicians to use that as, we need to get that what you didn't have yet,
Right,
or
right.
it's not right. The fight in the United States about left and right, it is so deep. The you know the there this distance in between left and right, and the incapacity of to have a conversation in between those two sides, is exactly because they are so into the righteous mind. They just believe so badly that they are the right side and the other side is evil and the other side is wrong and the other side doesn't care, and I think that is what brings us back to to the books, and to more even to how to have impossible conversations, because it is that important, to be able to have those conversations. So I think, I don't know. I've been around many groups and discords, and I have been part of a libertarian group recently, and I like the way that people behave there, because it's it's a field where everybody has some voice and brings ideas, and the goods are gonna stay up, and the bads are gonna disappear, and I think it is, we are somehow, okay, maybe we're not perfect, because maybe we're not never gonna get that, but uh, I think somehow we are evolved enough to be freer than what the government believes. Government, and I understand. I'm not trying to make government as like create a mythical enemy, because government is made by people as well. So it's what annoys me when we create those narratives of tribalism, to say blacks versus police or people versus police, as like, but police are made of people, or people versus government, and it's like government also is made by people. So it's
Right. So you want a golden standard for dialogue and conversation, and one of the things you found within kind of your libertarian circles and groups that you've been part of is that seems to come up in spades. It's actually quite everyone holds that to be a particularly good value, and so it encourages good conversation, and that increases your confidence that this kind of libertarian position is one that is a good position, is the right position to take. I understand that you have this kind of this freedom paradigm of something that's very important in terms of your political views. I'm interested in how you got there. What is giving you the confidence that the freedom of the individual is such an important value, let's say above care or above some of the other values that maybe other people using a different type of righteous mind would have?
Well, I think it's by my experience on the road, on the streets, dealing with people in general, public service,
Okay.
being a physician in Brazil, emergency room, emergency ambulance, going sometimes to all the time to people's house and seeing behaviors and patterns that are not fixed by policies. In fact, and I understand the politicians and even the policies were based in a good intention. I believe so. I'm very not into think the Democrats or the Republicans or bad or trying to do something really evilish, to people.
But they just
with
ended
bad
up not
intention.
working.
What I see, for example, in Brazil, we came with this like in until 80s, 90s, we had governments that were very more conservative, but not in their policies, but they were progressing. They were making Brazil progress. And when they gave the power, or when the populists and Labor Party got into power in Brazil in the 90s, they got Brazil with a good condition financially. So they saw that as an opportunity to fix Brazil. And they're like, oh, now we're going to install our giving money away policies. And they did. It still work today. In Brazil, you go to Brazil, you're poor, you're going to get everything from gas to salary, money from by number of kids you have, everything. The food, you can go grab the food somewhere. You have free health plan. You get free medicine, condoms, contraceptive pills, like pretty much everything. Government gives you. You don't need to take care of your life. The government will take care of it. But what that actually caused was a change in just culturally. We got poorer. Because Brazilians did not get richer. We're always like kind of like ashamed, like, oh, Brazilians outside of Brazil are seen as third world countries. So we got into developing country status. It was like, but we're poor, but we're hard workers, and that was the culture of Brazil. That was still that was something that would bring to the Brazilians some kind of a proud nationalism of being Brazilian. After those politicians came to power, gave money to everybody, and everybody felt like, oh, I have a little bit more. I can buy a cell phone, a car, motorcycle, something. Did not improve the place that they lived, their education, or even their jobs, because that would make them lose the benefit. So after 30 years of those types of politics and policies, we are just poor still. And now we're lazy. We're not hard workers anymore. So I think and I see the policies as a good thing. I would support when they came around, when they gave quotas in university to give Black people, let Black people score less in universities to get into the same other. I was like a kind of a sound racist, because I think that will cause some type of racism in the future, but it's okay. I don't want to oppose and be called the racist. But I think when we install policies, we can cause a feedback that is completely unexpected. That is like you actually gave an incentive for something else. So the incentive of giving money was not a good incentive for people to grow, and I don't think that is good for the nation. The same way that I don't agree with progressive taxes. I see in Brazil, because I work with technicians and nurses, they are on the line of making more money, and they choose to make less because they don't want to pay more taxes.
Okay, so for you, kind of coming to this particular position,
all the policies that are bad.
So for you, it's about the history of the country you grew up in, Brazil, and it's about your experience also working as a medical worker there, and you witnessing kind of the government go through a shift of having these particularly left-wing big government policies, and you witness them firsthand, even though maybe at the time you were supportive of them, but then you witnessed firsthand how it destroyed some kind of a Brazilian cultural identity that you consider is particularly important. So that's kind of that hardworking, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of mentality. And through seeing this, and those are values that you hold particularly dear, and more so, this idea of freedom of the individual came to you to be a much more important value later on in life, once you've witnessed when that's not taken into account, when there's maybe group versus group tribalism ideas, or maybe when policies fixate on group identity, or even when there's a big government and they spend a lot of money or have progressive taxes, progressive tax rate, picking up on what you're thinking. So when they punish, I assume that you would, if I'm putting words in your mouth, or you don't like my language, then that's fine. But I think the idea of kind of progressive tax rate, you might say that it might, punish those who are hardworking, who have earned more money, and so then it's also against this idea of the kind of the freedom of the individual. Does that? Yeah, have I reflected back to your thoughts?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, you're really good. You're really good at stealing, or Iron Man. Sorry, or Steel Man. I don't know what is the
right. Steel Man, I guess. But I'm just reflecting
that summary.
Right? But I think it was just a summary. I'm still so it's experience from which has driven you to a position where the individual is very important. If you were to witness the fact that, you know, trumping the individual over, let's say, certain types of policy was to have a bad effect. So if we were to do some revisionist history here, and you were to discover that actually these big government policies in certain places were very effective at, for instance, helping individuals and encouraging a culture where people were happier and more resilient, would that shift you slightly in terms of your ideal of how important freedom is compared to kind of the role of government?
Yeah, it should. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So it sounds to me like you'd change according to the evidence that you see in terms of political history, which I think you
Yeah, no, I
hinted
think
before.
I have a kind of a follow that list in Brazil that the first places where they installed the first giving money for people to get out of poverty. After 10 years, they came back to this place and the same population were being covered by the same benefits. The city have improved, got factories and more jobs, but the people that were employed then were all immigrants from outside of the city, and the poverty was pretty much on the same area and community. So it at least in Brazil, those policies, but I understand that also is methods, so how to apply those things, and this is something also I have talked more to Brazilians in the way that we have benefits in Canada, but they are limited. So it's something with a better the problem is because regulations require more regulations. So we're not going to make it a smaller government if we try to make it better.
Okay.
That's my point. No, because in Canada they do give money, but they have other organs into the government that will watch these people that are receiving the money to make sure they are looking for a job. If they refuse to get a job, of course they are going to get their benefits cut, and that's not how it works in Brazil.
How much freedom do you think people should have? So for you, freedom is clearly a very important dynamic when it comes to picking a political system. I'm interested to know how important the freedom of an individual is compared to a freedom of another individual. So, you know, you've got this individual expressing their maximum amount of freedom, which might mean that they do some certain type of behavior that causes this other person's life to be worse, because, you know, either, you know, they're polluting and therefore, you know, the nearby community suffer as a consequence because of that. Or let's say you have particular laws that allow people to take certain drugs and that has consequences, or whatever it may be. So I suppose, how do you, in your mind, see the trade-offs between freedoms of different individuals?
Well, I guess the freedom, mainly when it comes to speech, is all about not inciting violence. So
okay. What about freedom and freedom from violence, I assume? So, like, you know, I wouldn't have the freedom to punch you in the face, for instance. I think
there is something of all of that I don't know how to call this, but I've tried to talk about like some type of proportionality. You know, I understand that for example, when you mentioned about the laws on speech, I don't agree. Not even talk about the speech, but thinking on speech laws. What would be the line that the law should use as a principle should be the harm. So if there is no harm, and we're talking about physical harm, because someone can say like, oh, you offend me, and this is a psychological harm. And it's like, oh, you ugly, you should be banned because, you know, you're so psychologically harming me too. So evidence, I think the principle or harm, and the other principle that in fact the justice, when I mentioned like the justice is the law is supposed to be blind and is supposed to judge evidence. So when it comes to speech, and like I fought with you on the road, on the traffic, on the lights, and then I come and say like, oh, and he called me a faggot. It's like, you see that this is just so silly. I don't think this should be even brought to the law, you know, in front of a judge, because it's like, okay, where is the evidence? Oh, he said so. It's like, okay, so you can just turn any situation into, or aggravate any situation with a word that you can actually create and just put in there. So that is not the evidence.
So for you, it's because freedom of speech is really important, and that it goes right up to the line of inciting violence or causing physical violence. And I suppose I'd like to do a full circle in how you think of this in terms of other animals. So, for instance, with other animals, we eat them. We certainly we are violent towards them at least some point in their lives. We have to, right? And some people, at least once, right? And there is evidence that that they suffer as a consequence of many of our common agricultural practices.
Yeah.
Do you think that goes against their freedom in a way that should be stopped? So, this ideal of freedom of an individual and the fact that they have a capacity to suffer pushes them into your moral realm.
Yeah, I think we are doing that, and that goes back to really what we talked before, because I think we do that.
Okay.
Try to do with the less harm, and if we see, because in my city, small area in Brazil, countryside, like farmers sometimes are rough and tough on the animals, and there were viral videos already about someone beating pigs or cows and being unnecessarily harmful to them. Like, why are you treating with such hate an animal? Okay, you're gonna kill the animal to eat, but why you would mistreat the animal during life?
Yeah,
I love this conversation, and I'm a minute over my limit to open it up to the rest of people. If you guys could give me a quick summary, and then we're going to open it up to the room. Yes.
Sure. I'm happy to give a quick summary, and Fanny, if you want to correct me if I get things wrong. So in terms of, we started, it was quite a long winding conversation, and we didn't concentrate. It wasn't typical vanilla SE. I was hoping maybe we'd get onto the claim at the end that, for instance, Western society is doing enough for animal rights. I think that would be quite an interesting claim to explore, and maybe for another time. But nonetheless, the conversation, it went in terms of trying to explore your political morals, and also where morals come in, and the capacity to suffer is a very important metric for you in terms of deciding whether something should be part of that moral realm. And we went on to animals. You talked about, just like you said now, that you think the West actually is doing a pretty good progressive job, not only when it comes to animal rights, but also when it comes to the other types of rights. But there is a place to go, right? We haven't reached the end. There's progress to be made. You fear that the speed of progress is something where people may want to push the accelerator through policies or through infringing on people's freedoms, and you think that may cause much more dire consequences and ripple effects, and not take us to the place that we should be or aim to be. And you have a classical liberal political position, or a libertarian position, and how you've come to this particular position, how you know it to be true, is a mixture of personal experience growing up in Brazil and
I got to drop. I'm going to disconnect and see if it's me.
Okay. So in terms of you've had personal experience, so seeing bad policies as you grow up in Brazil and the consequences on the communities that you know, and also kind of a political science. So you evidence. So the fact that you believe in a small government is because you've observed so far that places with slightly smaller governments have worked out. Although you do say that there hasn't been this utopian government that you've imagined in your mind yet. So, and you're prepared to be persuaded in a different direction if you see the evidence for it. So your confidence in this idea that a libertarian position is one that is best for society is based off personal experience and also evidence. And so evidence would sway you in that in your confidence.
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty much that. Oh, yeah.
Okay, great.
Well
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we opening out?
Yes, I think we're opening it up. Production,
Yeah.
Do we have any comments from people so far, or are we opening it up to I think we're just opening up to the overall room. I don't see anything in the Collab SE text that would want. So unmute everybody. Now you may throw chairs and talk to our guests. Please go for it. Looking specifically for feedback on the two prior relinquus.
Can I ask my question?
Yes.
Go for it.
Okay. Is freedom an instrumental good or a final good? So if you notice that giving people freedom causes them harm, do you still give them freedom? So let's say somebody's in chains and you feed them every day, and maybe they're having a smoke on at noon and that kind of stuff, and you you decide to break their chains, and as soon as you break their chains, they hang themselves. As soon as you break their chain, they hang themselves. So the question is, hang. They kill themselves. Yeah.
Okay.
So
like Epstein.
yeah, like Epstein. So the question is,
But he didn't.
do you free them? Do you keep? So you've done this once. You've noticed it. You've done it twice. You've noticed it. You've done it 3 times. Do you keep freeing them, or are you worried about what they're?
No, I would just not bring him back to life to suffer for those many times.
Not him. The question is, what do you expect from freedom?
I'm just sorry. No, I think so. I think if someone wants to kill himself so badly, he should be allowed to. What type of life is that, forcing people to live? I don't know. I don't think it's a good idea.
So even if they cause themselves harm, or then you don't care about that kind of harm.
Well, it depends. If they're causing themselves harm because they're sick, we might need to treat them. But after all, you find out that this person is completely reasonable and it's like, no, I don't know, I'm a philosopher, nihilist. I don't have a family. I feel depressed. I'm gonna die at some point. I maybe is in a bad financial situation or whatever, and feels like he really wants to finish his life and is reasonable and is not sick. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we should cage this person and force him to leave.
That was just a simple question about whether you expect people to do something specific with their freedom, or you really don't care as long as they're free to do it.
They want with it.
As long as it doesn't hurt
Okay.
others, right?
Yeah, I think here.
Okay.
I think I'm experiencing some lag or some cut.
Perhaps. Does anybody else have further feedback? In the meantime, I'm going to say it was a delight listening to Harry do interrogation and to Fanny to talk about her things. I very much personally enjoy both of these people, so I might be biased, but this is extra good for me.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
It is true.
I wanted to see if I could give a good summation of what her answer to the last question was.
Oh yeah.
So, to my understanding, the question was, if there's somebody who is in slavery and we free them, and the first thing they do is kill themselves. And there's theoretically a lot more other people that could be freed in this way. But we keep observing that that seems to be the way that they're going. So the question, the answer seems to be that you feel like if they want to kill themselves so badly that they should be allowed to. However, if it keeps being like a thing that people experience, maybe there's surely not everybody feels the exact same way. Maybe there's some kind of mental health problem that needs to be addressed before we free them. So maybe we could increase their freedom slowly to where we know that they're in their right mind when they are fully free. Is that correct?
I don't know. Does it feel like talking about like transgender issues?
What was that, Fanny?
No, I said like it kind of a feel like if talking enter a little bit on the transgender issues right now, because it's like it's what a lot of people that talk against the transitioning on the transsexuals is because there's a very high suicide rate after.
that is something that affects my life. But did I give a good summary of what your position is?
Mm, I'm sorry, I don't think I got completely.
So you feel
It's
like
like,
you would allow people the freedom to kill themselves if they wanted, but if it was shown that they might be mentally ill, that you would want to help them before giving them the freedom to kill themselves.
definitely, yeah.
Okay.
So there is another dynamic here, Fanny, which is it's not just the freedom dynamic, like the freedom to express themselves. There's another dynamic here where harm does enter in it. So suffering of that individual, according to the freedom they have, isn't important. There is a balance to be had. And I think you're getting at this before, where that's why, incitement of violence and then also violence was not included within your freedom, because there is still kind of a seesaw between freedom and suffering.
Yeah, it's difficult to measure. I don't know. I think, look, two people with their, for me, when we talk about this thing on the harm, it's like, okay, can you prove the harm? And that would be the evidence. Because if it's something completely subjective, like if someone saying like, oh, she harmed me with her words, and maybe you're gonna go back to this history of this person, it's like, no, this person is already broken emotionally, and it's not about what I said that actually caused that harm. So see, this is such a subjective topic that is, for me, is not even an evidence when you talk about feelings and emotions. It's a little bit on the like science and justice should not care about your feelings, I guess.
Okay, so how do you, in your mind, determine that balance? Because there you gave an example of where you didn't think that the payoff of reducing freedom for care was worthwhile. So the caring aspect of someone saying, you should stop that because it's making me feel bad. You should stop saying those words because it's making me feel bad. And you say that's not a good justification, for instance, for removing my freedom to say something.
That is something interesting, because I don't know. I think when you actually announce, then you already stating like stop. It could be something on like me talking to you, and I say like, for example, the gender pronouns. Okay, it's something that have been very talked about. The gender pronouns. I think they are silly in general. Okay, but
Okay.
if I come to meet a person in the personal level, and the person says like, I would like to be addressed like this, of course I would not care, and I probably would end up even calling this person like that. But now to cause the law, the justice and government and state is like this higher authority and power to come after people, to make people do those things, is when I stop. And that is why the political compass is so complicated, because there are things you care, but you would still not force other people to do. And that is my position. I usually stop before I try to force other people to do it. Even if I believe that, like
Right.
I could believe that the masks protect people from corona, those funny face decorations. I could believe that protects people from getting sick, okay, from getting infectious disease. I would still not think that is right to force other people to wear it.
So that's very interesting, because there is a dynamic there where you have the potential to harm other people. So give them, there's an increased probability that you could give someone else coronavirus if you weren't wearing a mask. So for you, that's still not a justification.
I think if they care that much, they probably would be wearing a mask, and according to their principles, they would believe they were protected, and they should not feel unsafe. For me, what doesn't make sense is the person with the mask yelling the person without a mask that we are harming, or that we are putting them in risk. It's not so far like the vaccines, but kind of me saying that some unvaccinated kid is putting my kid in harm. And it's like, that's not true. She's vaccinated. I don't care about the neighbor doesn't want to vaccinate their kids. It's their problem.
But there is
Too
so
bad
some
for
of those
the
are.
kid. Too bad for the kid because he is a vulnerable individual. But should it be the government, the superpower, to come break the door and protect the kid from its own parents? I don't know.
So again, we're exploring this care, and you've mentioned this before, that principles are much more important than government in your head when it comes to deciding where this line lies. I think through fear of some kind of ripple effect, if we make such distinct lines and then use government force as a way to impose it. But in your head, there is still a line, right? There's still a caring point. And you're saying that with masks, that is not a point in your head, even if they do cause, let's say, further deaths or pain because people aren't wearing masks and that's their choice. You're saying that the government still shouldn't step in that example. And when it comes to vaccines, maybe they should come in, but it doesn't feel. It still feels like it's slightly not there, but slightly not justified, or maybe you're on the fence about it. But there is a point where you say, okay, this clearly, if there's a clear link between a practice causing an amount of suffering, for you, the government should step in at some point, right? There is a point in which you want the government to step in order to balance the seesaw a little bit and actually say, okay, there's enough harm going on right now that we want a government agency to step in, or government official to step in.
Yeah, I think we do that, and that is when we actually have evidence of harm, and never before. And that is the point where I kind of like, I think it wraps well. It makes sense to at least support government not fining people, not putting people in jail, in prison because they are not wearing masks or because they did not respect a health recommendation. It should be a recommendation and not a decree or a demand. That is what I actually think it should be. But of course, that would cause harm, would cause death. Yeah, but then it comes to my realistic view of life. It's like, who's not going to die? I'm going to die of something. Too bad if I die of corona, okay? But it is a risk that we all running when we are alive. We can die from anything. And I think in the reality we're missing that point more sometimes.
If the virus is more deadly, would there be a point where you'd say that the medical guidelines should be enforced?
Oh shit, I don't know, because there is a point where I would be putting masks, bathing in alcohol in jail, and not going outside. But I still don't think government should harm people to protect them from themselves.
So before we talked about the payoffs between two different freedoms, so the freedom for you to act and the freedom of another individual to go about their everyday and live their life, is there some point where you're expressing your freedom, for instance?
I think the government is there just to protect people from each other when there is a harm, and it's not to protect people, it's more to punish people when they do harm. And the government should never step on the things that the individual can do to itself.
So let's say I was to go out and I was infected, and I purposely coughed on
let people do a lot.
And I coughed on people and gave people the virus, and consequently their lives were much worse because of it. So some people really suffer from it. Some people had to be hospitalized because of it. Should I be punished for that? Should the government step in for that?
I don't know. Can we prove you did that intentionally? Is the intention something to do with it, or just because you had the virus?
Yeah,
you're just a carrier.
Yeah. So let's say we could prove my intent. I wrote in my diary before I went out that I've got the virus. I want to give it to
the government does do that. I think I actually believe the government does that. Is that not something like that? People that actually has HIV and intentionally will have sex with other people, not tell them that they have and get them infected, they actually can go to jail. I don't know if in the United States.
Do you think that's right? Do you think that's politically okay in your mind? Is that should they be punished for
well
that?
according to the government principles is right. According to, I guess, with my principles, it would be right if the person actually has the intention.
Okay, so intention for
then
you is really important
yeah,
for this.
in this case, because you're talking about someone that is potential, that is like as a syringe that can just inject anybody else, and if he has the intention, if we find out, to study this person, put in jail, and find out it's like, oh no, this person in fact is a crazy person, has some type of psychopathy, and it says that that is his purpose. He's gonna go out and gonna harm and inject more people with HIV. I would say like, well, that is why we have those crazy asylums for people to live there forever.
So if we
because
remove,
this is a person that potentially will harm other people, and that's why we have prisons.
I would
Put
be
people in
interested.
jail when they can harm other people. And
What
the other
would
people
happen
should
if
be
you
out.
removed intent? So a person who didn't have intent to harm a bunch of people, but ended up killing a bunch of people and harming a bunch of others through their actions, but there was no intention. Should they be punished? Should the government step in then?
Yeah, I guess we are doing that too. Yeah, because it's the other murder, like George Floyd, the guy did not have the intention, but because of a bad practice, he ended up killing.
Okay, so now I have a bad
and
practice of not wearing a
it's
mask, and we prove that through not wearing a mask, I killed 3 elderly people because I got on a bus and coughed on them. Obviously, I know I don't have the intent, just that we said before, but my practice has caused these 3 people to die. In your mind, should I be punished for that?
No, because now I'm trying to put in other situations. Like, no, we're not doing this with tuberculosis. We did not do that with Ebola and all the other infectious disease. Even sexual disease, others than. And I keep talking about HIV, but actually HIV is just fine. We have a lot of treatments. It's much worse to have C hepatitis, but just thinking of like, no, I don't think so. No.
So
The government is really
George
going
Floyd,
crazy on the corona. That's what we can conclude.
but what I find interesting is that
Why corona is so political? It raised this question. That is something that we should talk in the next conversation. Why did corona become so political? We don't do that to any other infectious disease.
I want to, Fanny, before we go on to that, I want to take you back to the point before. I want to try and keep on this place. So
I love it.
So with George Floyd, you're saying the police officer should be punished for for killing George Floyd, and but that wasn't intentional, and I don't have the intention of killing those 3 elderly people, but I did. I want to know how you pass. What are you doing there in terms of your epistemology? How are you working out that in the George Floyd case, the police officer?
Oh no, but because the police officer was physically on his neck and killed him, and because of the autopsy, we know the cause of death was suffocation, and he died out of this cause. So it's like it was a stricter line, It's like it's more for me now. It's about what links. What is the track? Can we actually say the police? We can probably not say he did that because he's racist, because I did not see any clear evidence that he did that because of racism. But he did kill. So the police killed George Floyd. We saw by video evidence. That's where we link and we give him the blame.
So
and we
if there was a really good link, let's say, I'm not saying this exists, but let's say it does exist. So we can prove with like a 95% confidence interval that I caused those 3 individuals to die, and it was from me that they got the virus. And I'm not saying this is possible, but just as a hypothetical. And so the evidence was as strong as the video evidence that so let's say they even put, like, I don't know, some kind of biomarkers on a virus, if that's possible, and it was within me.
I understood your question. I still think that the government is doing wrong when they are trying to punish people because of corona, because we have not done to any other worse infectious disease before. And now my question that you raised on me, and that I'm really happy for this path, it's why the government is behaving like this about corona and not about all the infectious diseases. Why are they taking corona so politically?
So do you think the prevalence of the fact that it hasn't happened in the past means that you shouldn't pay attention? is
No, I just
a
think
way of justifying or understanding whether a policy is right or wrong. So if it's happened in the past before, then it's more justified to happen now. So I suppose I'm not being very
government
clear.
has tried to be government, at least maybe because I've mentioned this in another podcast. In Brazil, there was a vaccine strikes riots in 1920, I think 1920, when they actually forced vaccinated people in Brazil. I'm very against any authoritarian measure, and I don't think no matter which disease, even if it was Ebola, that would be the case of me not going out and being locked down, mask and gloves and alcohol gel every time. I don't think the government should step up and force people anything.
And why
Government
do
should
you
be
think
like,
the government?
like that.
Why don't you
And-
think the government should step up and enforce rules? And that, let's say it's an Ebola epidemic. Why don't you think the government should step in and enforce, for instance, mandatory hours at home or like businesses?
No,
close?
they can manage. I just don't think they should be authoritarian in any measure.
So would you say authoritarianism, an example of authoritarianism would be like closing businesses and not allowing people out after a certain time period?
Yeah. They should they should give a recommendation as, look, there is this really, really bad disease. You guys can get sick and die, and cause all this harm to other people, to the health system. And it's all about individual responsibility. You want to open your business, be careful and try to not open. But I'm not going to force it. People. The business is going to be open. If there is nobody that wants to go, the guy probably will close in 2-3 days. Who is the government to tell them to not open? Shouldn't let really people do it.
So for you, because previously in the kind of me trying to understand your political position, you were saying you were judging policies in the past, and small government seems to be the best for people in terms of them to thrive and go about there. And you were saying that political science was a way of kind of understanding that a small government was a way to do it. If we were to have a small government approach for, let's say, coronavirus, and I'm not saying that we've got an example of this, but if we did have an example of this and we compared it to a country that had a more authoritarian approach, so let's say closing down shops and businesses for a set period of months, etc., and we can compare the number of deaths and suffering between those two, would that be a metric in which you judge whether a political system is an effective one?
I would love, because I think there's a lot of this conversation and not a honest level of what are the cause of death and how those causes of death are being computed. And even to talk about the cause of death caused by the policies of Corona, the authoritarian measures of Corona, of like all the people that died from waiting for a cardiac surgery, everybody that died because did not have the proper treatment,
So that would be a judgment.
All the people that will die without being able to treat their cancer, that would be able to treat, and because those are unfalsifiable claims. The one that I'm doing is unfalsifiable the same way they are doing their measures. They are gonna be in the end telling us like, oh my gosh, I saved you guys. So many other people would die, and we're like, you did not let us see that. And it's like, you're welcome.
So I want to try and, because I think we could definitely do another session on this, because I haven't nailed down whether it's care in terms of the suffering and people's happiness that's important, or whether it's actually freedom overrides.
Oh, no, everything is important, but individual freedom is the most important thing.
And why is individual freedom the most important thing?
Because we are individuals, because the government is supposed to protect the ultimately minority, that is the smallest minority of all, is the individual. We all together make a group and we try to restrain the people that are bad, people that do not do so good. We try to help even the bad ones that not doing so well, So I think this idea of the group over the individual, as public health is more important than the individual right, freedom, it is a good path for the government.
Okay,
To justify harming individuals for protecting them from their own choices.
Yes. Okay. So
yes. Thank you. Summary time, please.
Yes, sure. So I thought I'd kind of understood your political epistemology from earlier with the idea of you like childhood and political science. But it sounds to me like the way that you've decided freedom to be the best way of summarizing things is not necessarily in the lens of people thriving, but that it just is the ultimate ideal. So it's kind of like the bottom line.
Can I just say one last thing, one last story that I actually think is very important, and it's not about the subject, but it makes maybe you refresh your mind about my feelings about it. When I was working in an emergency ambulance was when I changed my mind about abortion. I was against abortion for a very long time. When I went through school, I passed through a period that's like, okay, I understand that not the kids thrive, but then, go back to that thing on woman and mother feelings, and like, no, but all the lies are lies. And when I went through the emergency ambulances and going to the houses and seeing families, their dynamic and everything, I realized that it was one of the dumbest policies we have done was the against abortion, to impede women to get an abortion. Because when I went to the house, there are many families, I was like, why did you not let these people? These people never wanted to have a kid. They mistreat those kids every day. Not even speaking about all the kids that I've seen in emergency room being beaten. Some kids actually saying, don't let me go back home or my father's going to kill me or my mom's going to kill me. At that moment when I was in the emergency, I was just so inundated with so many cases that, you call the social worker, and let them deal with that. But when I went to the house and saw that they actually had not only that they were beating, the one that were brought to the hospital, but 6, 7, they were all being mistreated all the time. I was like, This is why the government have to step back, because the government will never be able to take care of people's personal life, individual life in the level they want. So they need to let people make personal choices more wisely, better, and don't think the government will take care of them, because it doesn't. Only individual take care of itself. So I think is what I think it now, and I start saying is like, we should let people do it, because that mom that doesn't want to have the kid, okay, she should not be forced to, because if she doesn't kill that kid in the belly, she will kill it during the life. And even being a mom nowadays, and even more, because after passing through the experience of being a mom, wanting a baby, having the support of my family, having a financial situation, fine to have a kid, not having any trouble, difficulty, more than health issues, to have a kid during the pregnancy, but and the pain and the fears and the stuff is still a torturing situation as experience in many times, in many situations, in many moments. So I don't think we should force a woman to go through that.
I think we should stop. So I think we should probably stop now. And in my head, I see that freedom obviously is very important. I want to get to the kind of the nut and bolts of why freedom for you is very important. And it sounded to me at first that it was about kind of your experience and also political science in terms of how people's lives change according to the freedoms that they're given. So the ultimate metric or way of knowing which political system is good is basically people's livelihoods, whether they live happy lives, whether they're free from certain types of suffering, etc., etc. But when we went on to the examples, for instance, of handling viruses or enforced vaccinations, which we could theoretically have proof that, enforcing vaccinations does actually reduce a massive amount of suffering, you turned to me, or you basically said that, no, it's still not right for the government to do it. So people's livelihoods, is that still the metric? And maybe this is for a second SE session, and that's where I'm at, is I don't understand the care and freedom.
I think we need to schedule you guys. Yeah, it's all about time.
Let's keep it the next time.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
No, I'm fine with that, because there's a lot of care.
Both of you know how to get to my calendar, right? So you'll be able to pick out when it works, and I'll just say yes. You tell me when. Thank you. I'd like to open it up to the whole audience for any feedback on this Olympus. mostly about the SE, and then only secondarily, like maybe fighting against the positions or something, if you follow what I mean. So I invite feedback from the audience.
I will have some feedback.
Yes, please.
I have maybe 5 or 10 questions, but probably for next time. The feedback would be for Harry. In this case, I've seen this happen in other SE conversations. I think there are moments where it's good to interrupt the interlocutor, maybe when they are going on too wide of a tangent. And I think there is a way to interrupt without interrupting. Like when they say something, maybe to ask a question there to bring back the focus. Just like when someone is walking like towards a hole, and you just drag them slowly without being abrupt. That's the only feedback I would give for Harry. Otherwise, the conversation was really nice.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Indeed.
I feel like there are plenty of times that there were definite statements being made that could have been the subject that were not like questioned enough. I think maybe maybe figuring out more questions to ask, like practicing doing Socratic questioning a little bit more, so that you can recognize when something is something that you can talk about, like is something that you can question. Because it seemed like there was a lot of information being dumped, but not a lot of like structure being followed.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. I find that when I do SE sessions, and appreciate with this format, it's small, and often you can talk to people for several hours and you can expand over time, is that the themes develop through conversation. And I sometimes find that the formal way of Socratic dialogue, which forces people down a route, let's say I pick and I force Fanny down a particular claim and then ask questions. I got the sense during the conversation that she'd prefer to speak about the subject and the facts and how she understands it. And that's how she'd like to present the information to me. And typically when I'm doing this, we've got hours and we can have several conversations. So our second or third or fourth conversation, the same themes will keep reoccurring. And then once I've got a steady hand at some like absolute claims, for instance, I still don't really understand her epistemology with the freedom and care balance yet. And that happens through her just speaking through her views. And sometimes, and maybe it's not a great audience, maybe it's not good to view, but sometimes it can seem like word vomit or a lot of stuff happening all at once. So just statements of facts and then kind of this meandering minds as it goes around. And then we kind of summarize and we come back to it again. And I prefer to let people to meander and have their thoughts out on the plate. And then for me to pick bits slowly and kind of carefully through several sessions, start to form a singular, a kind of maybe a more definite approach to or statement to SE. But I appreciate that there's a different style to be had here, which is much more direct in the way that you ask questionings and you interrupt and you have those questions.
Are you a lawyer?
I can definitely appreciate your methods. I'm glad that there's some difference in the SE groups. I think what I was trying to say is that I probably would not have been fishing for a deep subject as much if there was something that I could just have an SE conversation on for practice, or maybe some of the fundamentals of her belief might be based on, like, some of the deep thoughts might be based on the same kinds of things as some of her more surface thoughts. Analyzing a small claim might be just as useful as analyzing a large claim.
I totally agree. And I think that that's where analyzing a small claim can be very helpful, is that she's using the same epistemology for something that's at surface level as something that's a much deeper thought. And with a subject like this, because we've got both morals, we've also got politics, both of those as SE conversations tend to spiral out and be quite complex and don't tend to fit within a neat package compared to, let's say, me making a particular claim out of the world or a faith claim or using a different epistemology entirely. And it's clear for me that Fanny prefers to use kind of science and rationalization as an epistemology. And when you both have that, it tends to actually devolve much more into a conversation around comparative views. And so it actually does, in my when I do this, is it tends to have much more of a conversation approach rather than a questioning. Because at the end of the day, I can only say, is that the best way for you to understand that particular thing? And she says, yes, according to the evidence, I understand. And so I already know that evidence is the way that she'd like to judge or change the degree of her confidence in a particular
Thank you for
claim.
the insight.
But I agree. I think that, and maybe that was something with the session we should have, maybe for feedback for later, is that when me and Fanny next have a go, is that we actually just sit down for 10 minutes and we get a statement. I get a statement from you, Fanny, and just get that confidence. And that will look like a different SE session entirely from the one that's happened now.
Yeah, to be able to close as an SE session. But that was pretty good. I think
Thank you.
we had this extensive conversation I did have with Chad and Brian, I think, from SC Group on Let's Chat, the Let's Chat and the Free Thought Conversations podcast. Unhappily, I don't think they released because we talked about Black Lives Matter and libertarian policies, and they end up like afraid, I think, the backlash or something like this. But he was very much, I think it was Chad was moderating and Brian was arguing with me because he is for masks and for more forcing masks, and I'm against forcing masks. And we both agree on some level of a higher protection with masks than without the masks. Okay, of course, you're going to at least stop the spray, the aerosols, and wet speakers, let's say like that. But, and then in the end, it was like, oh, but your core or like what your principle is public health, and my principle would be individual freedom, when I don't think it. And that is the problem. I don't know how to address yet, because I don't think there is a priority in any of those things. I believe in those two things, and I very much care about it. I just also am moved to not force anything because I'm very skeptic about what the authorities sometimes say. So it is an entire whole conversation, another conversation, because I would say like, I would just start giving examples of how science is not accurate at the first time. And I think it's too early to say the scientists really know everything about corona and that we should wear masks, not wear masks, wear gloves, not wear gloves, stay inside or not, Yeah. People are being very gullible. Like that's the point. It's like of being gullible or being skeptic. It's like, what is the principle? I don't know. People are being moved by fear, and I think fear is really easy to move people. And I'm just trying to be a little bit more rational than just go with the mass.
Okay. Well, I think that this ball could just keep on rolling, and I think that we should probably stop because there's been quite a lot. There's quite a lot for people to digest, and this session hasn't been, as pointed out, and by Kata Blades and FK, in terms of kind of the way that this dialogue has kind of stretched and gone, has been much more of a conversational one. Although I feel like I've got some of your epistemologies down when it comes to your politics, and you've made it pretty obvious that the capacity to sovereign freedom are two big denominators when it comes to figuring out which political system should be right, and you like political science and political history as a way to figure that out. And it's a mixture of that and your own personal experiences growing up and witnessing what certain types of policies have done to your own culture that's kind of formed your particular political philosophy. And when you judge things based on freedom, and freedom is the ultimate metric, I want to pick at that a bit more in terms of the balance between that and care, and that would be for another day.
Let's do it.
Thank you all for that. Am I correct that everybody else is complete? Has everybody been heard? And going going okay. Thank you very much for coming to the show today. These are some of my favorite street epistemology related YouTube channels. I have more on this list that we're going to add. If you are really into street epistemology and want to learn a lot more about the method, there is a lot of resource available at streetepistemology.com. Thank you, guests, and all the everybody who's here. I appreciate you all, and I wouldn't be doing this and couldn't be doing this without you. If you would like to be a guest on my show, I look forward to